A very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey, as always. I'm pleased that you have joined us. Well, for those of you who have been following my community, perhaps you are by now identifying those common threads that run throughout communities. Many of our guests, especially those in close proximity to the city, spoke of traveling to Queen's Park on Christmas morning.
There was a thing in this village too. It has continued in Barbados to some extent. There was something we looked forward to catch that bus at 5:30 on a Christmas morning, to go down to the park, to listen to the band, the police band, and to walk around, dressed in your finery, and your shoes sometimes which were often tight, because you're wearing them for the first time. And you didn't have a chance to break them in, as it were. And you went down dressed up in your finery band to mingle in Queen's Park. That has taken on a different kind of parade, but it is still there. It's still there. That thing is as old as the hills. But we all assembled at that bus stop, 5:30 on a Christmas morning, to journey down to Queen's Park to see what was going on there. And significant, there was no bus back beyond a particular time. So you would catch a Route 9 bus that came along the Ebenezer route, that came along that St. George route, and ended there in Ebenezer. And we would get off and walk across from Ebenezer to Brereton. It's a short distance. It was the same trip that we made from Brereton to go to school, so that was no big thing. But that generation was a generation of healthy people who walked a lot. They were not, the cars were not available, and of course, a bicycle was a novelty. A young boy with a bicycle, man, oh goodness, you would have to be of a certain social standing to own a new bicycle to ride around the place. But we did a lot of walking. So it was a fit generation. 70-year-olds now driving cars.
Certainly an indication of the changing times. Now, as it relates to housing, you would recognize that in this community, the houses were built as close as possible to the road. It was seen as a sign of upward mobility, coming away from the back and being directly on the front road, as it were. That is not so today.
My father, for example, when he built that house, which we moved into after the hurricane in 1955, he had enough room at the back that he could have pushed the house further back, 40 feet or so. But the aim was to get as close to the road as possible. I could jump off the last step on our house, onto the road. Now, when a cane truck passes up the road, or a tractor or a loud motorcycle, it was as though the vehicle is coming through the house. So there's no backlash from that. I don't want to call it lack of foresight. It was what informed the attitudes of the day. You want to come out of the back, as it were. You want to get close to the front, because you're coming out of a dirt track anyhow. You were not coming out from a paved road. You were coming out from a dirt track. So access was not easy. You had to walk sometimes with your shoes in a bag, or over your shoulder if you were from some parts, allegedly. But now you would see the actual hazard that closeness to the road has caused, with pollution and noise and all of that. Noise pollution, and also pollution from the vehicles, soil, the drapery and curtains and all of that.
Well, speaking of being close to the road, What about public transportation here in Britain? How did the folks get around?
The early system was we had the General Bus Company ran along here. That was one of many private concessionaires. Route 10. And I remember that bus as a boy. It used to be a red and green bus, the General Bus and the Route 10 bus. And then with development of the Transport Board, we had these enclosed buses. So we had that early General Bus Company and a few, one or two private people who had what would be regarded now to something like a minivan. But it was an open pickup, as it were. There was a Mr. Gaskin, a man from Marleyville or Merrick somewhere, who had this van, and he would travel along in the morning. He would probably make about 3 trips, one in the morning, one midday, and one in the evening. And that open pickup, Mr. Gaskin with his open pickup had his own clientele. Some people would not travel on anything but Mr. Gaskin. You would wait for Mr. Gaskin in the morning, and you would come up from town with Mr. Gaskin in the evening. But it was largely that old bus with the tarpaulin that you roll down, what we came to call the board and shingle buses after the Mercedes came on stream. So that was the kind of public transport. But of course, you had to catch the bus, because after a particular time, there was none. And it did have its disadvantages for persons of my generation who went to school in town and wanted to stay on to take part in games, cricket mainly. You had to catch that school bus that left them at 4 o'clock. But later on, we did get a bus. By the time I left school, there was a 7 o'clock bus. Left school in 65, there was a 7 o'clock bus. But then too, we had a much larger transport board where you had those buses, the Mercedes, and then the Leylands and all the other type. The first Mercedes, I remember that bus, M468. That was the very first Mercedes that ran along in the routes in Barbados and became very, very famous. And then the early Leylands, M1332, 4015. We remember those things. And the thing about the Mercedes bus, you get a group of school children. School children always were naughty, I mean. Every generation of school children had the naughty element among it. So don't let people fool you that these school children are any more naughty than they were. What seems to have been a characteristic is that there's a greater tendency towards violent conduct, and that is to be regretted. But that M468 loaded to capacity with a group of school children. Of course, there was not much traffic on the road. Coming from town on evening, school bus. And the first stop there, right by that same New Testament hall. And the driver read the gears down. And that Mercedes would just bow for about 10 seconds. And the school children would be roaring at the bowing of that Mercedes. And we enjoyed that thing. I mean, there was an inherent danger in all of that, but the the exuberance and folly of youth, if you want to call it that. But the buses, of course, the Mercedes, and then the Leylands and the Albions and the AEC and all those buses came on stream. And there was a gradual increase in the transport, a gradual development of the transport facility, where you could depend on a bus regularly, to the point where we were getting buses along this route servicing this village at half-hour intervals, which was quite reasonable. You could time your business accordingly, and that went on. Of course, we have the other thing now, the minibus and the ZR. They have spread their tentacles across the island, and they have added to the system, the good and the bad of the system, if you want to say that. People have been crying out for the indiscipline and so on, but they do provide a valuable service in that people do not have to wait for any undue period at any bus stop or point, because people get picked up all over the place outside of bus stops. They don't have to wait for any undue length of time if you are relying on public transport. So it has developed over time from that one bus passing down in the morning and passing up in the evening to the midday bus and so on, to buses flowing regular intervals. You just look around and rush out in time to catch a bus of some sort, some public transport of some sort. And that has been the general, gradual development of the transport system in the area.
What about the rearing of animals in the community and participation in the annual exhibition?
There was a pigeon fancier at the Carrington factory, a Mr. Maynard. He was a top pigeon shower down there. I remember him very, very well. Pigeon rearing was a popular thing among the boys of my generation here. And there were some popular pigeon people at the same Bentley plantation there. And Mr. Maynard, he won many prizes over time at that annual exhibition. But this village itself did not, I cannot remember anybody showing livestock at the annual exhibition. But all of us, young boys, young women, young people, we look forward to going down to the park around the 12th of December. I remember the time used to be around that, to the annual agricultural exhibition. And that was a place where you met people too. It was a meeting point, if you want to call it that, at the exhibition. Of course, too, it was a fashion parade. When I was a youngster, young men wore suits to the exhibition. And young fellows, young teenagers, growing up into adolescence, look forward to putting on that suit to wear to the exhibition. I remember my older cousins parading their suits, going down to the exhibition. And things have changed. Things have changed. It was a fashion parade, the annual agriculture industrial exhibition. And you went and you look at the cows and you look at the sheep and you look at all these things, the rabbits, and you chatted and you were able to get an ice cream or a hot dog for a little expense, as it were. A hot dog would probably cost you about 25 cents in those days. Yeah. But prize livestock rearing and showing was not a thing of this village and St. Philip generally. As I said, I could remember pigeons being showed by Mr. Maynard at Carrington. And, but I remember the names of those people who excelled in showing dairy cattle. Mr. Dan Springer, he used to win nearly every prize every year. His son Hal was my good friend, and he was involved to some extent in later years. But livestock rearing was an expensive thing, especially prize livestock rearing, the type of livestock that would win you a prize at the exhibition, so that you had to have some background in that kind of animal husbandry, facilities and for housing the animals and for feeding them and that sort of thing, and to keep them in good shape so that they were at a state where you could show them. And that was not a characteristic of the village.
There are many among us today who would recall that dreadful day in September 1955.
That Hurricane Janet took us by storm, because there was no means of communication. The nearest we had to a mass communication for people in the village was through cable and wireless. There is, or was, as you leave the upper part of Burton, going across the road there into what we call the Carrington Valley, the cable and wireless receiving station. It was the only receiving station on the island. And that did provide some opportunity to learn about those things. When Jeanette came to Barbados, a few people had what we call a private radio. And those radios were operated by a battery. And there were a few of them in the village. And the people who had them would have a wind charger to keep the battery up to optimum level. So you were taken by surprise, as it were. And the wind started very, very early in the early morning, as it were. I remember it very well. And every single effort had to be made by every member of every household to try to do everything that was possible to keep that roof on. And that, Jeanette, introduced a very important aspect in the future architectural development in the country. Because the houses that best withstood the fury of Jeanette were houses that had what we call a hip roof. And that roof had gables on either side, and then at the extreme ends as well. And the four sides of the roof, as it were supported in the center. And no matter how old the house was, and it had a hip roof, it seemed to withstand the fury of Jeanette. And people then saw, I was looking around to see if I could see the remnants of any of them. But that is a modern, that house there, that roof there, is a modern thing of a hip roof. You see how there's a slope here, a slope there on either side. And think, that slip roof, that hip roof, was the one that withstood the fury. And we lived right aback of the Baptist church. I remember it very well. There was a man who had access to the church, and he thought, well, look, let me go and open this church so that people in these little houses, vulnerable houses, which our house was one of them, could come and get a shelter in this sizable wall structure there, the Baptist church. And we saw that man, house was no more than 100 feet away from our house. That man opened the thing and beckoned us to come into this place. Come, come. And my brother, my eldest brother, was just able to shout at the man, move, move. When he opened that thing, the roof came clean off. Oh yes. And that was something which I saw with my own eyes, you know. And it did have some damage in the village. The church which I told you about, that was one of the small oak churches of the parish church at St. Philip. The church hall there, that was totally destroyed. And a few other people suffered damage. But we were told subsequently that the worst damage was on the south coast of the island. Places like Silver Sands, Lodge Road, lost some lives too. But we avoided it to some extent. But as I said, a lot of the houses that were able to withstand that fury were houses of that kind of roof. Ours was one of them. And it stood up to it. And we were able to go back to normal living at the end of the storm. But most people were unable to make any preparations for it. I remember during the howling that was going on, we left our house there to go to a bigger house where our grandmother lived with another family, the Franklins. And all of us were there engaged with every man, woman, and child, little fellas, big fellas, everybody, with some ropes that they had attached to the roof to try to hold it down. And that, as the winds blew, every man holding on to these ropes to try to keep the roof on. It was an experience I never forget. I was a youngster then, but of course, I was old enough to appreciate what went on. 1955 and 22nd of September. But the main damage was done on that south coast of Barbados. Well, we were up and about walking through the village, small village. There were not many poles around to block the road because there was very little electricity available in the area. So we came to grips with it from the point of view that you went around and you saw whose house was blown down or whose roof was blown off. And that was a major concern. And then, as I said, the church, which would have been a very good center for an emergency, that had lost its roof. But thankfully, a number of houses were not destroyed. So people were able to pick up the pieces, as it were, and get back life together. But then I remember well, and this is something that came into the culture, developed out of Jeanette. There was a government program that sought to put people back on their feet and to give them a little house to live in. And there were these little houses, which we refer to as storm houses. But the thing was not the storm houses as such. It was the effort to get these storm houses put up. Every man who could stand up or hold a saw or a hammer became a carpenter. So the thing of a storm carpenter became part of the vernacular. First of all, don't mind he's a storm carpenter. He's one who became a carpenter because of Jeanette. Not that he went to any trade and was able to cut joints or anything. He's a man who was able to get a saw and a hammer to take part in that program, that crash program, as it were, to provide these little houses which the government, through its various agencies, were able to erect for people who were most deserving of them. And that brought into the Bajan vernacular the definition of a storm carpenter. Yes, I remember them very well. They were invariably painted green, a dark green. And these little houses on those 4 concrete blocks, storm houses. But that was a great relief for the people who had lost their houses. Electricity was not a big thing at all, because generally speaking, the kerosene lamp was the thing. So we did not miss anything when it came to electricity. And the standpipe would still be there to provide water. Because take that area where our house is at the top of Brereton. We lived there for about 3 years without electricity or running water, because there was none available. There were no water mains bypassing that area, nor no electrical supply thing. So the thing was a kerosene lamp. People who were a little more affluent had a gas lamp, which they pumped. And those things used to look very, very bright. If you see one, know you wonder what it is. And the home sweet home chimney, home sweet home, that lamp, the kerosene lamp, provided the light. And I don't know how anybody managed it. I believe that we adapted to suit, because I cannot imagine how I could have, or anybody of that generation, could have read with a kerosene home sweet home lamp. And I believe we did most of our reading during the day. I went to bed early. But if your electricity goes off now, for example, and you light up one of those things, of course everybody has some kind of battery light or something now to act as a temporary thing. But if you had to light up one of those kerosene lamps now and try to read, we did homework by those lamps. I don't know if that's why the eyesight of some people went, but to say we were without electricity was not an issue. Electricity was not an issue because there was none. So you got back your light by pouring some oil in your lamp and lighting it up. So the standpipe was there. So you went to the standpipe and got your water supply as usual. So that loss, there was not an impact from any loss of electricity or loss of water, for example. Of course, telephones, the nearest telephone was at the same cable and wireless or at the Bentley Mansion. So telephone was not a thing, or was not an issue that anybody thought of. But that Hurricane Jeanette was a serious, serious thing. And the fact that we were unprepared and underprepared in instances where people could have been slightly better prepared for the coming of a hurricane, was disastrous for some places and some people. I remember very well, we had some root crops in the family plot, rather than, and not canes. It was one of those periods when the ground was being arrested, and we had some root crops. Man, it devastated those the corn crop we had there, waiting to get ready to eat, to get some roast corn and so on. It devastated the crops, trees. Oh, terrible. It was really not a pleasant sight at all. And for days, I mean, a number of places, roads were impassable. Of course, the ability to cut up these things and clear the roads and have equipment ready to clear highways and so on. But this village, almost self-contained as it were, you were able to survive.
And that is a very important point. Their survival was due partially to the self-contained nature of the community. Certainly something that we could learn from today. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. The series continues next week at the same time. People want to know how our happy soul, Barbados, Barbados,